Hi, thank you for watching this presentation on the balanced approach to literacy instruction. We're doing this online because we're kind of running out of time, and I wanted to be sure to provide this information to you because you're going to see some of this and some of the vernacular throughout this presentation on your certification tests, as well as the final that's based from the Tompkins chapters that you have read from the midterm until the end of the semester. So I want you to have this information handy. I want you to have gotten into it just a little bit so that when you see the questions on the final, especially, it's not foreign to you. And then, of course, you've got to be prepared for the EC through 6 certification tests, and hopefully this will help a little bit. One thing I'd like for you to do before we get started is have a piece of paper and a pen handy. I'm going to ask you to kind of stop and think throughout some of this. You're also going to be watching a couple of videos throughout, and there are some questions about what do you notice about the video. So be prepared with something to write with and write on as you're going through this presentation. I will ask that you bring whatever your quick write is and what notes you take with you to class on Monday so that we can discuss. And if you have questions for me, have those questions ready for me on Monday regarding our balanced approach to literacy presentation. As for the quick write, here's the question that I want you to write about for about a minute and 30 seconds or so, just thinking so far. You should have read the chapter from Tompkins before doing this presentation. So hopefully you have a little bit of an idea of what's expected, what some of the words are, what some of the theories and topics are. But I want you to think about, and just really quickly, 1 minute, 30 seconds, write about how you could create a balanced approach to literacy instruction in your classroom. I would pause the video if I were you and just take that minute or so to write, and then continue on once you have finished your quick write. This quote comes from an older edition of the Tompkins book, but she says, "There's no one best way to teach reading and writing. Instead, teachers create a balanced literacy program using 2 or more approaches." If you've seen a balanced literacy approach in a classroom, you know that no students are being left behind. What's happening in balanced approach to literacy is that we are understanding that students learn differently. Each one of us learns differently. And by using some of these suggested ways of balancing literacy in your classroom, you're more apt to reaching all of your students. I want you to, on your quick write piece of paper, think about what's going on at Bowie in your mentor's class. How does your mentor teacher organize for reading instruction? And what have you noticed in your mentor's classroom about reading instruction? Pause the video again to answer your thoughts there on that piece of paper, and then come back and continue on. Tompkins says that there are 4 commonly used approaches to balancing literacy in a classroom. I can tell you that I don't know that I've seen all of these in a classroom, especially over the last few years. In fact, I've been in education now for 10 years, and I've never seen a basal reading program in a school. But that doesn't mean that it's not out there. It doesn't mean it's not available, and it certainly doesn't mean that it's not part of a balanced situation. Further into basal readers, these are a volume of books that are individually leveled so that the lowest level is the beginning, and the highest level would essentially take a child up to about 12th grade. These began in early school days, early 19th century. They're called the McGuffey readers back then. The McGuffey readers looked like this. I don't know if you have had the history of public education or got into any of the history of public education, but in the 19th century, the only students that were allowed to go to school were those whose parents were sometimes monetarily available to send them to school, And generally, education was based around the practiced religion. So some of the McGuffey readers had much of that content involved. And then after a little bit of time, the Dick and Jane series became something that was used in elementary schools especially. And if you know anyone who maybe your mom or someone older, just slightly older than mom, would have experienced the Dick and Jane books in school. I remember reading in one of my elementary classes a Dick and Jane book, and it's very simplistic, what I remember. It's very short sentences like, see Jane run. Jane has a red ball. Just very, very simplistic, basic level, foundational level reading to get students to build reading knowledge. These stories, these books, these volumes of books did conform to the cultural standards of the time. The good news is that things kind of started to change over time. Originally, the Dick and Jane era Basils were very gender role specific, showing mom in the house and dad going to work, girls doing things around the house to help or taking care of things, and boys just kind of being boys. Later, gender roles began to mimic more of what was seen in culture, like girls playing baseball, or women having jobs, or men staying home and cooking dinner. Segregation was actually apparent in Basel readers. As you can see in the picture, it's a city bus with only common-looking people. There is no diversity other than color of clothes in that picture and what you would see as people on the bus. After the Civil Rights Act was passed, though, things started to change a little bit, and by 1965, there was a little more diversity present in Basel readers. Integration started becoming more apparent, and mixed classrooms started to appear in some of the images within the Basel readers, as well as inclusiveness. Back in the time when I went to school, I wasn't aware that there was a special education class on our campus, and this is in high school. So I wasn't aware that there were special education students on our campus. And that's because these students were housed in a different part of the school that most of us never went to. And these students were not integrated with us. They didn't have lunch with us. They didn't walk down our hallways. So I'm aware that there was a special education program at our high school, but I couldn't tell you any of those students' names or anyone that I would have encountered at school in that situation. So Basel readers actually started showing that different people exist in our world, and inclusiveness with people of special needs, or things that people might be, how people might be different from others, started appearing in these readers. And then family structures started making an appearance. Single fathers was one. Next is our Reader's Workshop. Hopefully you've had some experience with a Reader's Workshop. It's really just reading a book and spending some time working in it, talking about it, answering questions, discussing, having mini lessons. If you're going to have a Reader's Workshop, this teacher in California has some really, really great, these two videos that I'm asking you to watch are really great in how a teacher handles a Reader's Workshop in his class. So I'd like for you to click on the links to view the videos from teachingchannel.org, and on that sheet of paper that you have for your quick write, answer the questions there on your sheet of paper. What do you notice in the videos? And for the first video, how does the teacher conduct his Reader's Workshop? For the second video, what's he doing to check for understanding? He's really, really, really involved with his students, and he is making a difference in this reading workshop because he is so involved in this. I want you to pay close attention to what he's doing there. Unfortunately, I can't embed these videos and have to provide you just the links because it comes from something other than YouTube. Take a minute to write down your thoughts, watch those videos and write down your thoughts, and then come back to the video whenever you're ready. Sorry, come back to our presentation whenever you're ready. Some things that are specific to readers workshops are the idea that you need some time to be able to allow students reading time in the class. This might be in addition to your regularly scheduled reading section of your day and the guided reading section of the day. Provide your students choice to empower their ownership in learning. And as always, metacognition is extremely important. Have students think about what they're thinking about, or think about what they're reading, think about what they're learning. So responding to a journal or having some kind of reading log where the students get involved in and answer questions about or reflect on what they read in a response. Harvey Daniels is the gentleman who created the idea of literature circles. If he didn't create it, he definitely is the one who has written most and teaches about literature circles. Literature circles is another way to balance instruction in your classroom. And Mr. Daniels says, one of the best ways to nurture students' love of reading and ensure that they become lifelong readers is through literature circles. Small student-led discussion groups that meet regularly in the classroom. How would you manage a literature circle? Well, you've got to first give your students choices of what books you have to offer them. They need time to read. They need time to write down what they've read about, and you can do that in ways of having the students complete job sheets or role sheets after they read, or journal, or answer questions. You have to give students time to prepare or share, time to share with their literature circle group. And then once everyone has completed their books, you have a final reflection or some kind of group product that the students will complete to end the literature circle. Book choice could be something as simple as finding a topic with books that span that same topic and giving the students the option of one of these books. How do you do that? You have your students involved in a book talk. You have the books. You tell the students a quick synopsis or a quick summary about the book. They are choosing from this set of books that you have. They're getting excited because of the summary that you're giving about each book. So you want to make sure that your students think about the top 3 choices that they have out of the books that you're offering, so that if they don't get their first choice, they still get one of their choices, hopefully. You'll need multiple copies of each book so that if you have a literature circle of 4 or 5 kids and they're all reading the same book, then you need to have a book available for each of them. So if you're going to get involved in a literature circle, you need to make sure that your librarian or someone is helping you find copies of the book. I have spent tons of money at Half Price Books collecting multiple copies of books to provide for students to complete literature circles. Not that I'm saying go spend a lot of money, but sometimes that's what happens. Books can be based on a common theme. In fact, I would teach a fiction theme or a fiction span of time over a semester in the middle school. And one of my favorite topics to teach was survival. And that's where these books come into a category of survival. So I would book talk each of these books, ask my students to think about which top 3 they would be okay with reading with another group. The students then tell me their top 3, and I organize the groups based on their top 3 choices. Hopefully everybody gets their first choice. But whoever chooses Julie of the Wolves, I'll put them into groups of 4 or 5. And then whoever chooses Sign of the Beaver, I would put them into, put all of the students who choose the Sign of the Beaver in a group, and so on. Here's an example of students reading. The job sheets are important to get students involved in reading and to have a role in the group. Each job is different. For example, there could be a discussion director, which is the one that leads the discussion. Then there could be a vocabulary finder or a passage picker, which is someone is the person to find a paragraph or a section of the story that they're reading that meant something to them, or that really stuck out to them, or that left them wondering what's going to happen. So there are lots of things you can have your students do as they're reading, but you want to give them individual jobs to begin literature circles so that they understand how they're interacting with the story. Over time, though, you can start minimizing the job sheets, and by the end of the year, you want your students to be proficient enough in discussing, because they've had enough practice using the job sheets, that they're able to complete a literature circle without a job sheet. Here's students working on some role sheets, job sheets, and journaling. Group meetings where the students who are reading the same book come together to complete their discussion using their role sheets. And of course, if you like, as a teacher, you could involve yourself in conferencing with students. Again, as students want more empowerment, they want ownership in their learning, give the students a choice in how they end their literature circle. These are some ideas that you could provide your students as a project to complete at the end of reading. Have the students write a reader's theater script based on the book that they've read, and then perform it in front of the class. Things like dioramas, or a video game, or some kind of digital storytelling. It's always a great idea for students to complete the final product of Literature Circle. Another thing that's really fun is students can create a commercial, record themselves creating this or doing this commercial to sell their book to the rest of their class. So the rest of the class hasn't read the book that they've read. And the idea is to convince or influence your fellow students to read this book because, of course, it's the best book. We've already talked a bit about guided reading because of your spelling inventory and the running record. That's essentially the data that you are compiling to create your guided reading groups. So I'm not going to spend too much time on guided reading, but I do want to reiterate that guided reading provides opportunities for teachers to work with small groups of students on texts that closely match their needs, their abilities, and their interests. So you've seen guided reading groups in your mentor teacher's class at Bowie. That's where she pulls 3 or 4, maybe 5 students over to the kidney table and is working with them individually. She has data on those students and is planning for what those students need specifically. And she's teaching them or reteaching them by doing mini lessons or working specifically on skills. So before reading in a guided reading group, the teacher sets the stage for understanding and response. What are your expectations? What are you working on? Why are you working on this? And here's what we're going to do. During reading, the teacher's working with the students, reading, pausing, asking questions, checking for understanding, and moving on. After reading, more discussion of the book, specifically working on the skills that were asked or that needed to be worked on during this guided reading session, and more checking for understanding. Then, of course, in guided reading is a great time for mini lessons for vocabulary work or punctuation work or working on process skills or asking higher level questions. So whatever you might need to do additionally with your students, this guided reading time would be a great time to do that. This image is a link to a video that shows a teacher working with her students in a guided reading situation. Pay close attention to what the teacher's doing, and I also want you to write down the answer to the question, what's the rest of the class doing during guided reading? Take a minute to write down your response, pause the video, and then come back to pause the presentation, and then come back to the presentation once you are completed with your answer. So in a guided reading situation, the teacher has her attention focused on the students that are immediately in front of her. You know that inattentiveness disrupts everything. So if the teacher is constantly having to focus on the students in the background and not the students that she needs to work with right there in front of her, not a lot's going to get done. Attention's going to be diverted. There isn't going to be much concentration. So the students who aren't in the guided reading group need something to do. This is where your planning and consistent practice and routines becomes very, very important. One thing that you can have the students doing is participating in centers or literacy workstations. These require some work up front, lots of time up front, lots of preparation and thinking about what you want your students doing during this time. But once it's set up and once your routines are consistently established, your students know that it's guided reading time and they know what they should be doing while those other few students need your attention. So you will work to set up and organize these centers and then teach the students about how to operate during this time of the day in your classroom. This book, Literacy Workstations by Debbie Diller, is an absolute necessity for teachers who teach elementary school and will do some kind of guided reading. I do suggest if you have an extra couple of dollars hanging around, see if you can find a copy at Half Price Books or order a used one online through Amazon. It will help immensely in organizing your classroom during guided reading sessions. Here's just an example of how one teacher organizes her literacy centers. If you'll notice, the students' images even appear on the little note cards to the right of this board to show the students exactly who you are, what group you're in, and what you're expected to be doing at this time. The video mentions the Daily 5, and I know that some teachers at Bowie are using this, specifically kindergarten class. I think Ms. Koyatso's class is doing this. But the students know, because you've taught them, what the Daily 5 is. And they know that when you say, okay, guys, it's time for Daily 5, what they have available to them to do. The Daily 5 is read to self, read to someone, listen to reading, working on writing, or working on spelling or word work. You've taught your students and you've consistently created a routine in your class so that students know when you say Daily 5, they choose one of the 5 and they go to that center and begin working on that thing. That gives you the opportunity to focus and allows the students at your guided reading table to concentrate on what they're supposed to be learning. The other students are supplementing their education by working in something educational. Everything is good. Everybody wins. Here's a video of the Daily 5 in action. Again, the image is embedded, so you should be able to click on it and work. It should work. If it doesn't, the link is provided to you below. Take a look at this one. Pause the presentation. Come back to it whenever you're ready. I'm not asking you to respond to this one or anything, but if you notice something specific, go ahead and jot it down on your sheet of paper. And here is the end of our presentation. I'd like for you to revisit your quick write and think about the things that we've talked about: Basel readers, literature circles, readers workshop, all of the guided reading things that we've talked about, and add information about what you think you would like to add or change to what you wrote previously. And then you'll note the quick write question originally said, how could you balance the literacy approach in your class? Well, this one is, how will you organize for instruction during your first year of teaching? Just add a sentence or two, giving me some idea of what you think you could do in your classroom as a first year teacher. Because if you were to go into a classroom and start teaching, and you've got all of this already lined up, and you know that you want your students to participate in a literature circle, and you've got it organized, and you've got everybody ready to go, and a principal walks into your room, they're not gonna know you're a first year teacher. So I want you to think about, how are you gonna do this in your classroom as a first year teacher? And how, hopefully, this is informing your ideas of what you could do as you begin your career. You might want to pause the presentation because there's one more slide, and then come back to it. Actually, there are two more slides, but this is the one I was thinking about. If you have any more questions or you want more information about some of the things that were discussed throughout this presentation, here are a few links for you to research or read if you have some time. I'm not going to go through most of them, but you've noticed in the presentation, the Debbie Diller book, her website link is here. The teachingchannel.org link is here, and it is fantastic to view videos of teachers in action. There are also lesson plan ideas on there and many, many other things that will be helpful to you as teachers. So take a look at some of these to get some ideas of how you could balance instruction in your class. I appreciate your attention on this one today. Write down whatever questions you have for me about balanced approach to literacy, and we can discuss them on Monday when we arrive in class. Have a good weekend, ladies.